Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. Do you find relationships at times very, very challenging to be in? I don't care if it's a love relationship, it's with your friend down the street, somebody who lives in your apartment building, someone who is a classmate. You might have some sort of connection with them and you call it a relationship, but you're going to find at times that it is challenging to be in relationship with them. We have explanations for things. It says, okay, well, maybe their values are different or something. Okay, it can be that with anyone. But I think our role models for relationships are often the genesis of why it is difficult. And I'm going to expand on that. When I say role model, I'm thinking of maybe your mom or your dad or someone that you admire. But given how we perceive relationships are supposed to be, and we look at two people getting along and we assume that things are going well. So we figure, wow, they must be all the things that we value. They're very loyal to each other. They're honest, and add all the good things in there. So we want something like that for ourselves. So what do? We find somebody who would be the object of our affection, and then we carry with us all of these beliefs about what we think a good relationship is, and then we try to operate the same way. Our beliefs. And I'm going to give you an example of, let's say you have a parent who you know, who has always been loyal to you, who has been faithful, honest, all of those things that they have instilled in you. And you go find somebody who becomes the object of your affection, and you carry all of those traits with you because that's how you were taught to be. Now, the object of your affection, they are an independent being. They are going to operate in the relationship the way that they are going to operate. Now, maybe they have a dark side. And as you can see, there's so many variables to this other person that you may not know about. And it takes, I feel, being in a relationship to know someone. The day-to-day interaction when people want to be around us brings out a very likable personality, something very likable, at least the potential to do that. But when we have to be around someone constantly, and I say have to, but when we expose ourselves to someone constantly, let's say we live together or something that causes us or puts us in a situation where we are interdependent, now we're going to see the stress. We're going to see the not so nice side. And when we get exposed to that, that may shake us. But let's say because you're honest and you're loyal, you're all of those things that your parents were, they instilled these values in you, you are going to still come back and you're going to be the best person you can be. Well, sometimes when you get involved with somebody who doesn't have the capacity to be that in return, now we keep wishing the best out of this situation. And you wonder why people hang in there. And these kinds of relationship experiences. I can tell you why. Well, the reason is it's that you are operating in your value system. Your values about being honest and loyal and faithful because you were taught that these are the things that bring about the reciprocal in someone else. Now, we may even be blind to the fact of how they are actually behaving in a relationship towards us. They may not even be loyal, but because we figure, okay, I'm going to be a good example of loyalty. I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to stay right here by their side. Even to the point where many people in relationships, men and women, actually allow themselves to get run over and get hurt, emotionally abused, all of those things. Because we don't believe in leaving. So you stay stuck in situations like this time after time after time. And it's your belief system. It's your belief that if you are good enough, they are going to come around. Now, it is very hard to shake that. A lot of these kinds of beliefs are rooted in, and we may tie it to our faith, because we are taught to believe that people are good, that they have a good side, and it's just if you love them enough, they're going to come around. And then there's also the idea that if we were good enough, they would love us the way we want them to. Now, that can be a really, really tricky one to us, because there are some deserving issues in there, and how you observe loyalty and trust and honesty. And when someone isn't being that towards us, I think what happens is we feel, well, they're not being loyal and honest towards us because we must have done something to make them behave that way. That's kind of narcissistic in a sense, but it happens time and time again. It is a lot of work to be in a relationship. And I think on the idea that if we're good enough, if we're loyal, if we're faithful, somebody who mirrors that value is just going to show up. Or we're going to be able to get it out of them if we are good enough. Now, that is a really, really high bar for some people, because they are just not going to give you what you're looking for, what you're asking for. And just by the scope of their understanding of your love and your commitment, that's what made them attractive to you. How do you deal with situations like this? If you have found yourself in a connection with someone who seems as though they're just right on the cusp of being just what you wanted, but they just sort of slip away, and then you feel like you're the cause of them behaving badly. Why? Maybe because they told you you're the cause. Now, why you would take that on, you really have to do some deep digging. And again, I believe it is because of your role models. Now, your role models meant well. They established really good values. But if you're not with a person who can see it on the same level, your values are being corrupted. Not because you're trying to live by them, but because somebody else on the other side is using you in a way that you stick to your values and they cannot measure up. You have to see that. Now, this puts you in conflict with that other person. And if it's a love interest, this is a really, really difficult place for a lot of people to be, because it's conflicting. It's conflicting because you are confronting them and are going to ask them to own up to who they are being. That is a very, very difficult thing for a lot of people to do, is to be confrontational. It's scary. It's scary if you've ever been that person who has confronted someone and then has been scared at the reaction that you get. Because the idea that if you confront somebody with the truth, that they are going to own up to it and then change their behavior is a perception that many people have. No, you have people that will lie to your face and pretend everything that you're telling them is an absolute falsehood, that they have nothing to own up to, even if you have the proof, the pictures, the writings, whatever it is. And many people will back down and want to believe them, because your values are about being loyal and faithful, and that if you step away from that, that somehow you become a bad person, and you don't want to be that in your eyes. That's a very, very difficult place to be. I'm going to follow up on this and talk about this some more. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hello there, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. One of the things that conscientious people are taught to do is to look themselves in the mirror and be honest. That's where you can, whether you're looking in the mirror and seeing your face, seeing your expression, or if you are laying down in a bed, imagining a conversation with yourself, however you get there, but you're at peace and you're really contemplating whatever those thoughts are. And let's say you're asking yourself about this person that you're involved with, and you're really trying to come to grips with what the conflict is about. Are you the reason there is conflict? Is it some belief that you have about this person that they are in conflict with? And it might even be something that your perception of them is overwhelming them to that their reaction to you is to push back. Sometimes it's like that. Sometimes you can be very overpowering with your goodness, your love, that people who aren't comfortable with that rebel, and they do all sorts of things to push back against that. Maybe they don't feel deserving, and I have seen examples of this. People get in relationships with someone who just, to describe it, is, beyond their perceived reach. I mean, you get involved with this great person. You've got some, a really shaky history, and then you get involved with somebody who's really, really nice, really good to you, and then you start feeling guilty about it. Because now they are being good to you, and you know it. Everybody knows it. But you're going to have to reciprocate. And somehow there's just some guilty feeling about being treated well. There are a lot of people that go through that feeling. So what do? You start either treating the person poorly because you want them to go away. You don't just tell them, look, I don't want to be in a relationship with you. You start doing mean things. Why would you do that? Well, guilt. Guilt is huge. You feel guilty about this person caring about you. You feel like you don't deserve love. So what you're going to do is you're going to make the situation so difficult that you're going to want to make them go away. That's on one side. Then on the other side, you have this very loving individual who has the values of loyalty, honesty, sticking it out, thinking, well, if I hang in there, this person is going to be good. Then you have what? That's a conflict right there brewing. Even in the conversation, can you imagine this? These two people having a conversation. You have one person, like I said, they're not even totally honest about their intentions. Have you ever been involved with a person like that who you were so nice to them, just sweet all the time, yet they did not return the favor? I'm not going to say they were just outright just mean and bad to you. You can kind of see that kind of that much distortion usually shows up, or somebody's telling you about it. Something happens and you get to see that. You get information somehow, some way. But when you have the experience of this person not showing up and being available to you in your hour of need, your moment, now remembering that you have been loyal and steadfast in your support of this individual, but yet when the time comes for you to cash in your chips, they are not there. But you will stand strong. Remember, that's your value. And you can hold on to that. But what we have to learn is to expect someone to reciprocate. It's okay to have expectations. It is definitely okay. Because if you don't, then you're going to constantly be run over and be used with no payback, with no payoff. Relationships in their very nature are designed to be reciprocal. That's the intent. Don't fool yourself. It's okay to have expectations. And that's what conversation is about. It's about having a talk about what the expectations should be and creating some ground rules for how the relationship is going to operate. Because if there aren't any expectations, anything can happen. I'm not saying anything is fair game. I'm just saying anything can happen. I think it's good that we verbalize what our expectations are. And I've used that word a lot. But you have to do that for yourself as much as the other person. People who are so accustomed to loss are often afraid to expand or explain what their need is because they're afraid of being alone again. So they don't want to put expectations out there. They'll take, and I've seen this because I've talked to people who have this challenge with really expressing themselves in terms of what their needs are because they're afraid that they will be rejected just for something very simple, such as, hey, when I call you, are you going to call me back? Are you going to be there when the phone rings? Some people are very available. Hey, with today's technology, when the phone rings, you can see who it is. You got the Bluetooth. Phone talks to you, tells you who's calling through. If you can't respond at the moment, you can usually tell them, hey, I'll get back to you right away, or at least have that understanding. You know, put out there what your need is, have a conversation about it, what the boundaries are, and then go for it. Make that happen. Some people are afraid to even do that because they are afraid of being alone. Loneliness is a very hurtful place for so many of us. And so many people feel they are alone because they deserve to be. Somebody told them, look, you don't deserve anything. You deserve to be alone. And that guilt thing just really plays on you because all of these memories of things that we've ever done bad in the world, we feel like, today is the day of reckoning and we're getting payback. And we beat ourselves up and beat ourselves up and beat ourselves up. How do we get here? Like I said, our role models do a lot for us. And I mean in the interpretation of they tell us good things, they talk about good intentions, and then we try to live up to those things. But when we fall short, we don't understand that sometimes it is people letting us down time and time again. And we don't know how to hold those people accountable. It's odd that we would want to change their behavior instead of change our own. But that's what we do. I think the behavior we need to learn to change is our own. We need to be able to look in that mirror and say, okay, what am I doing in this situation? If I have these expectations and they aren't being met, I have to say my expectations aren't being met. Own up to that and be ready to step away and revisit how you can put your life back together and still be okay. I know stepping away from a relationship is one of the most difficult things people can do, especially when you have built up something from a foundation and you're proud of it. And I know all relationships aren't perfect. None of them are. But I'm talking about the kinds of situations where you have poured your heart out, you have made yourself available, and honestly so. And you have someone who, on the other side, is not willing to give you something of what you need in order to be sustained in that union. You have to call it out. You have to. You have to have the courage to do that. And it's in those moments, they're the most terrifying moments. It's almost as if you feel like you're jumping off of a building. Now, I don't want you to do that literally. I'm just giving you how scary it is. You're jumping off a building. Yeah, you've got a parachute because I want you to land safely. But even with the idea of knowing that parachute's going to open 100% of the time, people won't take the jump. They won't take the leap of faith that they need for themselves in order to make their life better. Because it's in that moment of fear, that you're going to find the biggest growth for you. I'm going to stop here, take a break, and I'll come back and talk about that some more.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hi, I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm talking about role models and relationships. Look, learning to take that leap of faith for your well-being. As scary as it is, it's something you want to learn to do. Practice it over and over. Learn to invest in yourself. Have that charisma, have that passion for what you do, and invest in the kinds of things that'll give you the payback that you deserve. And in some of the relationships we choose to be in, they work for a time being. There are times we get involved with people and it seems like a perfect fit. And then in time, that perfect fit seems not to fit. There's a simple description of that. We say, oh, they grew apart. That just simply describes the two people who were a great fit are no longer a good fit anymore. And it can be fairly complex, but some people grow and some people don't. Some people are very stagnant. And at that moment in time when you came together, it was a great union. But one person grows and the other person doesn't. And you keep trying to, pull them up the mountain with you and they don't want to go. They fight you all the way. Well, sometimes you got to let them go. You got to let them stay where they want to stay and you keep growing. Keep growing. Because remember, your role model taught you faith, integrity, honesty, all of those good things, those things we value. And if your partner doesn't want to participate on that level with you, then step away, move on, grow. Continue to live into your possibility. Now, going back to that, having that heart-to-heart conversation with somebody, it's in those moments that when you take that leap of faith, confronting them, confronting your own fear about what's going to happen next, but confronting that other person, it may be their epiphany to realize how they aren't contributing, how they are holding you back, and what you're willing to risk in order to make it better. Because remember, you've been in this situation, in this relationship, holding it together, been faithful, been honest, trying to operate and do the job of two people when the other person hasn't really contributed. I know of many situations in which one person went to counseling and the other person didn't, because the other person didn't feel like, they didn't need it, even though their partner was crying and struggling to try to hold the situation together. Situation meaning relationship. And I know there are many of you out there that have experienced this very thing, and what a lot of people do in those cases, they go to counseling, the counselor helps them cope. That is, gives them tools to cope with this situation. Some of those tools include not only understanding yourself, but understanding where your partner is, what their limitations are. Maybe even if you know something about your partner, hopefully you do, that you can bring this into the counselor and talk about what you know about their past. These things can really unfold to give you a clearer picture of who you are in a relationship with. And sometimes that information, when you take it back to your partner, boy, the light may go on for them. And maybe it could get them to really think about this dynamic, why the relationship is stuck, why they are behaving the way they're behaving, why they're treating you poorly, treating the relationship poorly, and not trying to better themselves. And I'm talking about in the basic way. I'm talking about being less selfish, being available to handle the responsibilities that they should be handling. Do you know something that users do? Users always find somebody to use. I learned this a long time ago. I had a very, very dear friend explain to me a situation that was happening in their own family. They had a child who basically was given a car. Well, I say given, but their responsibility was that they were given a car, they were supposed to pay for it. And they didn't. And the mom, my friend, she kept paying for it. Kept paying. Mom finally reached a place in her life that she was financially strapped paying for this car. So she finally had to have the car taken away. Now, the kid went nuts because the car was taken away. But the problem was the kid didn't own up to their part of the responsibility. And here was the mom paying this and put herself in such a bind. Yeah, she felt terrible about having to take the car away. She didn't do it because she wanted to, but the situation kind of forced itself to happen. Now, the kid eventually came to recognize how selfish and inconsiderate that they had been behaving, and for such a long time. And through the dynamic of having to deal with that loss, she took over the responsibility that she should have had been doing for a long time. Well, that was a good outcome. Mom and the child had a much better relationship. This is a true story. I just don't use a lot of names. I don't have the permission to. But it worked out. They were very close. They were able to talk about the things that were wrong in the relationship. Obviously, kids get angry at their parents because their parents aren't perfect. Kids do that. And parents feel very guilty because their kids don't like them a lot of times. And the kids are very vocal about this. They protest. Well, as a parent, that's one of the things that you have to take on. Sometimes your kids have bad attitudes, and they're just going to have to learn that their bad attitude is not going to get them what they want. I know that's hard. I'm a parent. My kids have done things that I didn't like. But I respected the fact that they were kids, but I did not respect their bad behavior. I would point it out to them, and I would tell them that they need to fix it. Down the road, when they became grown, they had their own responsibility, and it was like that's when the light went on. It wasn't cute to be the age that they were pulling the kind of stunts that they were pulling. Just in life, in general. They had to be responsible because they were creating situations in life that were not going to be fixed by dad or mom. So the role model that I was trying to be for my kid was somebody who understood that there's accountability, there's responsibility, there's being able to look into that mirror, that is my kids, look in the mirror and look at who you are being, so that when you are having an impact on somebody else's life, you really understand that. Now, that was great for me, to see that they would actually have that conversation with themselves, and they would come back to me and say this. And my kids would say it's because we learned it from you, Dad. I love that about my kids. And by the same token, when it came to them having that conversation with their significant others, it was a lot easier for them. Now, they had some relationships that weren't so great while they were learning this process, because it's a way of being. And sometimes we get in our own way in order to get better, but that is part of the process. They got better. I had to stop bailing them out too. Now, that earlier example about the car, that wasn't me. That was, like I said, a friend of mine who had to deal with that situation. But I could see how that applies to all of us as parents, all of us as role models, and then the experiences that we have when we are the child, when we are carrying this thing forward and being in our own lives. And remember that there's a word where something repeats itself from generation to generation. We call it dysfunction. And breaking that cycle is very important. Why? Because usually when we talk about dysfunction, we're talking about things that don't work. And being able to put your finger on that for yourself and then talking to future generations about that. I'm talking about your kids, people that you bring into the world, people that you're responsible for, people who you love. Those are very important conversations to have. Now, you first need to have them with yourself so that you can understand how much of a role you play in where, you know, your life circumstances. And as you have that self-talk, as you work through those things and learn about yourself, you can talk from the experiences you've had. And I believe that's when you can have a captive audience of your kids, of your significant other. Because you're not necessarily making them or making the story about them. You're talking about yourself and the trials and tribulations that you've been through. And they are going to be relating to it. Because these stories, as you tell them about yourself, they're very humbling. Because when you talk in those terms about yourself, and I'm talking about bragging about all the things that you've accomplished, but when you're talking about the things that you have failed at, people will listen because they respect the honesty. They respect the humility and what it requires of an individual to be in that particular place, to want to share that vulnerability. It's very captive. That is charismatic in a whole different way. Role models in relationships. Be that. Have that. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.